and he's going to be talking with us about carbon pricing and climate change. Please help me welcome Tim.
Hi, thank you. I want to thank the Ethical Society for allowing me to be here and speak on this very important topic. My name is Tim Healy, he, him pronouns. I'm a volunteer and I co-lead the, can everybody hear me? Thanks. St. Louis chapter Citizens Climate Lobby. And after this, I'm going to refer to it as CCL for short. So before we get into it, just like by a show of hands, how many folks here in the past year have called or mailed or emailed one of your elected representatives in the Congress or Missouri State Legislature? Good, 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 good. It's a very, very engaged crowd. Just by show of hands, how many folks have mentioned climate change in your communications with your representatives? Good, good, good. Citizens Climate Lobby, or CCL, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We have chapters in all 50 states. We have chapters outside of the US. And we have actually multiple chapters here in Missouri. And what we do is we promote carbon pricing legislation. So we do things like sending letters to our elected representatives, calling them, organizing calling campaigns, writing letters to the editor, writing op-eds, trying to get everybody we know to do that, trying to get endorsements for carbon pricing legislation, and that's our mission. So let me go to the next one. So quick agenda. I was a little aggressive when I wrote this, and I don't think I'm going to get to some of these things, but I'm for sure going to hit carbon fee and dividend and carbon border adjustment mechanism. And the other things, I will be sticking around after the platform for Q&A. So anyone who wants to stay afterwards, just feel free and hit me with questions. Okay, so I probably don't have to lecture folks here about the dangers of climate change. I'm sure everybody here gets it, but I think every once in a while it's good to just take stock of where we are, especially there are so many headlines going on right now about crazy things happening, other things happening, that it's easy to just lose track. This is an article, it's based on some NOAA data that came out recently. The CO2 in the atmosphere has reached a level that's now the highest in 4 million years. And at that time, 4 million years ago, was a time known as the Pliocene climatic optimum. And at that time, the sea levels were about 78 feet higher than they are today. The global average temperature was about 3.8 degrees Celsius higher than the industrial baseline. And I mentioned that, I just want to bring this up, the industrial baseline, because in climate articles, climate change context, you always hear these numbers, 1.5, 2.0, these are always in reference to an industrial baseline, which is usually defined as the year 1850. So whatever the global average temperature was in 1850, these numbers are like in excess of that. So for reference today, does anyone know roughly how much we are above that baseline? If anybody wants to be brave. We are around 1.1, okay? You'll see different estimates, but we are around 1.1 degrees above. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on, I put together these disaster slides from the last couple years. I'm really going to pop through them pretty quick. We had the flooding in 2019, Australian wildfires, more than 1 billion animals died. This crazy northwest heat wave you might remember from the summer. Massive flooding in Europe that forced hundreds of thousands of evacuations. Hurricane Ida, not long after that. And this is just in the last couple years. These things are just getting worse. And here's a chart that kind of puts it together. Billion-dollar disasters are going up. And behind those numbers are lost homes, lost businesses, and lost lives. So I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. There was an IPCC report out earlier this year. Very quickly, I want to touch on President Biden's goals. 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030, net zero by 2050. And I know that there are folks who follow this who may be skeptical of net zero by 2050. Is that enough? There's a whole discussion to be had about that. But I hope we can agree, whatever you think about the goals, that doing something is better than doing nothing. And reducing greenhouse gas emissions by any amount is better than business as usual. So what are some things we can do to try to drive the greenhouse gas emissions down? There's a lot of little things you can do, right, that you can think about doing. Putting up solar panels on your house, buying, sustainably sourced, locally produced goods, eating less meat, paying a bunch of money to buy an electric car, I guess. Lots of little tweaks that people can make, and different things that businesses can do as well. There's not a single solution that's going to solve this problem, okay? But there is one really big solution, and it alone won't solve this problem, but it's like the biggest piece of the puzzle, and that is putting a price on carbon. Okay, this is where I'm going to hope that this works and show a video, because it explains the general concept pretty well. Hello?
What is a carbon fee and dividend? And how does it help solve climate change? Burning fossil fuels. What is a carbon fee and dividend? And how does it help solve climate change? Burning fossil fuels causes carbon pollution, which traps heat and warms our planet to dangerous levels. To stabilize our climate, we need to stop carbon pollution. How? By changing the rules to the game. Right now, carbon pollution is free for everyone. With a carbon fee and dividend, fossil fuel companies pay a fee when they pollute the air. Since most companies like saving money, they'll change their behavior to avoid the carbon fee. They will become more energy efficient or clean up their act with cleaner energy. With this policy, our carbon pollution goes down while green goods and services go mainstream. Costs for some things will go up, but for many purchases, we'll be able to substitute a greener choice. And as businesses move to greener products, they'll provide us with more affordable green options. For example, car companies will shift to producing affordable electric cars. And power companies will replace fossil fuels with clean energy. And remember that carbon fee? The money collected from fossil fuel companies goes to every American as a monthly dividend or carbon cashback. People can spend the monthly cashback however they want to. helping everyone afford the transition to green energy. When we stop burning fossil fuels, our air will be clean, our health will improve, and our climate will stabilize. All we need is a price on carbon, with the money given back to the people.
So the bill that has been introduced into Congress, there was one a few years back, and then they renewed it this cycle. It's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, HR 2307. Just for note, there are a few other carbon pricing bills that have been introduced. Obviously, they haven't been passed yet. Also, with the Build Back Better reconciliation bill that's being negotiated right now, there is a possibility that carbon pricing may go in. You may have heard there was a whole clean energy program that unfortunately got taken out. There are a lot of things in that bill for climate change, and it's being discussed that there might be carbon pricing. We don't know yet, but it's not off the table. If it goes in, then we won't be talking about HR 2307. We'll just be celebrating that we have carbon pricing, and we'll be planning what to do next. I can go through these. The bill has 87 sponsors and co-sponsors, including our own Manuel Cleaver here in Missouri. And it has thousands of endorsers, businesses, local governments, faith-based groups, lots of other entities have endorsed it. And so let me talk about the Economist Statement on Carbon Dividends. It's not a specific endorsement of HR 2307, but it is an endorsement of the carbon fee and dividend approach. This was created by initially over 3,300, but it's grown to 3,600 economists who signed on to this statement. It's the biggest public statement of economists in history, and it includes 4 former chairs of the Federal Reserve, 28 Nobel laureate economists, and 15 former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors. Just, I should step back a little bit, just to say a few more words about how this bill is supposed to work. It's going to put a fee of $15 per metric ton of CO2, of what will become CO2 emissions on the fossil fuels as they're extracted. That's the first year. Every year after that, it goes up by $10, so it's getting ratcheted up to increase those incentives to transition. So you might ask, there's a couple questions that you might ask, is this going to work? And you might also ask, could this adversely affect the economy, it's going to cause prices to go up, right? So I hope to present from multiple sources the reasons why we're so confident about this. So the first one is a model. It was created by an organization called Resources for the Future. And you see the solid green line is the projected emissions, and you can see like percent of 2005 net emissions. So you see it going down through the year 2035, and then those green dots are targets of the HR 2307, or the Energy Innovation Act. So at this point, I'll say it again, if we're not hitting our targets, it is possible to ratchet that price up even more. The light colored band corresponds to the IPCC's recommendations for keeping the global temperature rise between 1.5 and 2.0 degrees by the end of the century. There was a report done back in 2014 by a group called REMI, it's Regional Economics Models, Inc. And I just put some highlights here. CO2 emissions declining by 33% after 10 years, and national employment increasing by over 2 million after 10 years, and that's creating green jobs and innovation. And also, something that doesn't get talked about enough is how many lives will be saved just from the decrease in pollution. Even if we weren't worried about climate change, these big coal plants are polluting the atmosphere. So 13,000 lives saved annually. Another report, this is out of Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy. This was done in 2019. And I'll just read some of the highlights. So the greenhouse gas emissions declining by 36 to 38% by 2030. Air pollution declining. Energy prices rising but not skyrocketing. And then this last point is really important, so I'm just going to read it. Because higher income households purchase far more carbon intensive goods and services, distributing dividends equally implies that average low and middle income households receive more in dividends than they pay in increased economy-wide prices, okay? So I may have forgotten to mention this, but the dividends get paid equally to all legal residents, and the children get a half share. There was also a household impact study. This was by a researcher out of University of Pennsylvania. And the conclusion, this is one slide out of many, many pictures and pages, but one conclusion is a majority of households will see a net benefit because of this, okay? And he's broken down so that all households is the far left, and this dark green is who's getting the net benefit. You've got 28% who are getting like either unnoticeable or just very minor loss, okay, in terms of whether you're getting a benefit or a loss. All right. And if you break it down into consumption, the lowest quintile, the lowest 20%, that would correspond to the least affluent households, the people who are spending less because they don't have a lot of money. They are the most benefited, okay? Because all the prices will rise a little bit because of this policy. So the people who are buying more stuff, the people in the top quintile, the people who have big gas guzzling SUVs and are taking jet flights a few times a year to their vacations, they don't get as much benefit because they're paying more. So this is an estimate of what would a monthly check to a family of 4 look like in the first year. And it comes out around $65. It'd be like $22 each for the adults and maybe $11 each for the kids. I did independently. I did some stuff in Excel, and it came out similar to this. So I'm very happy with this number. And the idea is, you're a family of 4. Carbon pricing goes into effect. Some of your stuff costs a little more. There's an estimate for like a gallon of gasoline would go up like maybe 13 to 16 cents in the first year, okay? Just to give an idea. The cost you're paying for stuff, gas, clothes, food, will probably be less than this $65 a month. So you're going to have a net benefit unless you're buying lots and lots of stuff. So, okay, but will it really work? This is all theory, right? Well, guess what? There's actually been a big study on carbon pricing, okay? So this was done in 2020, and they analyzed data for 142 countries, and there were 43 of them which by the end of this 2-decade period had some type of carbon pricing policy in place. And the results of this study are that of the countries that had some type of carbon pricing in place, they actually had a 2% annual decline in greenhouse gas emissions, whereas the other countries had an average 3% increase in greenhouse gas emissions. The study was real careful to say that that difference in 5 points, it wasn't totally due to carbon pricing. There were other factors. You can imagine, though, a country that's on board enough to implement carbon pricing is probably doing other things too to reduce its carbon footprint. So wait a second, you say there's a bunch of other countries that are pricing carbon, and yes, there are. We're not yet. I think they might be someplace in California, but the U.S. is not. But yes, there are countries pricing carbon. As of May of this year, there were 64 different carbon pricing schemes globally. They're not all the same. They're definitely not the same as Energy Innovation Act, but they're out there. Some of them are also cap and trade. That's another type of carbon pricing, which I don't have time to get into here. Happy to get into it in the Q&A, and what's the difference, or what's better, cap and trade versus carbon fee, but I'll leave that for Q&A. So, other countries are pricing carbon. Oh yeah, you might wonder who. So just a partial list: Argentina, Canada, Chile, China recently implemented some trading scheme, although they're still the biggest emitter, but they're early. Colombia, Denmark, the European Union, South Africa, Sweden, UK, Ukraine, and just to name a few. So, with all these other countries that have already started pricing carbon, that brings us to something that is, you don't see it in the news very much, but I think it's going to be in the news more and more. And it's called a carbon border adjustment mechanism, okay? So let me just give kind of a quick explanation. It can get pretty complicated, and I'm not going to try to go into the weeds here, but a quick explanation. Imagine you are a manufacturer here in the U.S., and maybe you've got a factory and you're making candy bars or something, and you're worried. You think, okay, you're going to raise my energy prices with carbon pricing. That's going to put me at a disadvantage with somebody in another country their country's not pricing carbon, so they have a slightly lower cost structure, right? So you've got that competitive disadvantage. The carbon border adjustment mechanism is meant to take care of that. So basically, goods that are being imported from non-carbon pricing countries will have a fee imposed on them. So that when they get into our market and compete with our goods, that kind of evens it out. And then also, goods that we export to non-carbon pricing countries will get a rebate. So it's meant to even it out. And this is no longer theoretical. This is actually about to get very real, because just this past summer, the EU, which has carbon pricing in place, announced that it would start doing a CBAM. Now, it's not going to go into effect for maybe a couple of years, but they have decided they're going to do it, and they're just working details out now. And when that does go into effect, U.S. manufacturers who want to sell into the European market are going to face that fee. And that's even if our US manufacturers are being super diligent and using green energy and being real efficient, which in fact, US manufacturers are quite good at that sort of thing. But we won't get the credit for it because we don't have this type of policy in place. How am I doing on time? Am I okay? Okay, we're good. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, so I'm probably going to skip over it. We're hoping that carbon pricing can be put into BBB. Maybe talk a little more in detail about this in Q&A. There's also COP26 just wrapped up. There's a couple things to say about it, but I don't want to, again, don't want to get too much into the details. And plus, some of the dust is still settling. So I wanted to do some shout outs. First, how many folks think that we might be in a climate emergency? How many would call it that? Okay, that's a lot of hands. So I want to thank the Ethical Society, because earlier this year, the Ethical Society made a resolution on the need to declare a climate emergency. And there are faith groups and local governments around the U.S. are starting to do this. And I think it's great. It brings attention to the need for action. Now, just a shout out to, there's a group that's doing this, and I'm kind of buddies with them here in St. Louis, but it's a national group, but it's called Climate Mobilization. So if you're interested in climate emergencies, definitely check them out. So I'm in the shout outs part of my talk. I know a lot of folks here are in Sierra Club, so if you haven't checked them out, definitely take a look at them. Some other groups that I know are active around St. Louis are 350.org, Sunrise, and Fridays for Future. A couple other groups that I'm just in love with. One is called Braver Angels, and it encourages, it's not climate change, but it encourages people that are on the far left and left-leaning and right-leaning people to have civil discourse. And if we can't have civil discourse and if our democracy is dysfunctional, we can't solve climate change. Okay? Environmental Voter Project is a get out the vote effort. They do phone banking. I did it once. It's a hoot. I definitely recommend checking into that. One thing I like to say is if the climate news is depressing, take action. That's the best. Don't ignore it. Don't get depressed. Do something. Check into Citizens Climate Lobby. Write your member of Congress. Check into these groups. Real quick recommendations. Should have done this in a different order. If you're into podcasts, the Climate Pod is really awesome. A lot of good information. Another one, to a lesser degree, by The Economist. And a couple books. This is my last slide. One is called Drawdown. It's full of lots of different ways that we can fight climate change. And then another one who I'm acquainted with, the author, it's called Bright Green Future. It's actually stories of groups that are getting together and doing things. Groups, individuals, businesses that are making sustainable livelihoods and projects. And it's, I found it inspiring. And with that, I am done. Please stick around if you have questions. I will be here after the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That was, I think you had a very captive audience here. We're not passing collection baskets right now, but if you're moved to make a donation today, you can do so at ethicalstl.org/donate. But don't feel you have to. We recognize that this is a difficult time financially for many people. And now James has a couple of things he'd like to say. James.
He's coming.
Oh, okay. Making a great